Welcome to Bleach Revisited. I am Carker Gold, your host of this series in which we will be reading every single chapter of the Bleach manga, providing critical analysis of the art and narrative, as well as personal response to each of these chapters. We'll also be discussing how the chapter connects to the rest of the manga as a whole. As usual, we begin these videos with a reading of the chapter that we are currently discussing for the episode. This is Chapter 111, Black and White. If you're worthy of possessing me, prove it. Take me with your own hands. From your own hands. Ha! Take it. Interesting, huh? Come on. Take it. If you can, partner. I can't block it completely. Holy. I never realized Zangetsu was such an awesome sword. Its spiritual pressure is burning up the air. What a monster. A regular Zanpakuto looks like a stick beside it. How the heck am I supposed to win with this? What's wrong, partner? You better watch out, or I'm gonna kill you. Huh? Here! What the? Huh? I missed. Throwing Zangetsu and using the hilt wrap to retrieve it? What kind of a move was that? I never would have thought of it. Ha! You're pathetic. That's a mighty sword you're holding there. How do you manage to get so bloody? I don't get it. Can you become best friends with someone just by asking them their name? What did you say? That's basically what you've done. You think that calling Zangetsu's name is all there is to it. It's always about you, instead of you trying to bring out Zangetsu's powers, or understand him. Zangetsu is capable of so much more. If you'd open your heart to him a little, he'd have become even stronger. But you couldn't do it. You don't care about your Zanpakuto at all. You're one of those guys who thinks the only one he has to train is himself. He's right. I never tried to get to know Zangetsu. Zanpakuto aren't soulless tools. They have names, they're alive, but still, my Zanpakuto has no name. Glad to hear it. That means it won't get any stronger. What was I glad about? I'm such an idiot. We're the same. I'm just like him. All I know about my sword is its name. I don't know anything about Zangetsu. What was I thinking? I'm no better than the guy who couldn't bother to learn his Zanpakuto's name. But I want to know. Hey, I'm gonna wrap this up. I'll show you what it means to make the most of Zangetsu. You won't ever hold Zangetsu again. Will you tell me, Zangetsu? Little by little is all I ask. Tell me about yourself. I want to know. I want to know about you, my priceless assistant. So tell me, and let me once again fight with you. Zangetsu! What? Are you giving me another chance? Thank you, Zangetsu. What the is this spiritual pressure? The detritus survivors of 11th Company visited our relief station today out of the blue. They came to see their fellow company men, Ikaku Madarame and Yumachika Ayasagawa. They started drinking and stripping inside of the relief station. It was beyond my control. That's why I hate their company. I wish all of them had been defeated by the Ryoga in good health. That is it for chapter 111. Black and White. I remembered this time. I remembered it. You can't call me out this time because it was a very simple title. And my brain was able to keep it within its empty recesses for a total of 5 minutes. Congratulations to myself. Anyway, it's Black and White, chapter 111. That's it for this chapter, but it is a pretty neat chapter, all things considered, and we're going to take some time to talk about it. And so it's interesting here that we hop in and we're still in Ichigo's internal world. We're still inside of that kind of world in his own mind, so to speak. And here I like that we get to see like these two facets of Ichigo, right? We get to see this mirror of him, this dark reflection of him. And then I say dark, it's white reflection, right? But we also have Old Man Zangetsu standing side by side, so it's these opposing forces, right? That there's this thing that Ichigo needs to kind of overcome, but moreover, he needs to really become aware of the wholeness of the powers that he is wielding, right? Because this really represents Ichigo's struggle at this point, in that he is wholly trying to rely on his own power instead of the power of those around him. And I mean, this is a problem that Ichigo's had, right? He's tried to rely on his own strength whenever he has all of these allies, all these other people that he needs to lean on a little bit more, right? And so, kind of, again, speaking of the individual, speaking of them against the society, that's one of the kind of flaws that our character can have, is that because he becomes so individualistic, because he's so defined by his individual struggle, it's a lot harder for him to kind of, even though he makes these bonds that are very personal and very like individually kind of defined, it's harder for him to lean on those and be alongside them, because he'd rather take care of things on his own. That's the issue that Ichigo's kind of having, and especially here where he's not really treating Zangetsu as if Zangetsu was this separate entity that he was fighting alongside. He hasn't really taken the time to actually see Zangetsu as a partner. Whereas here, even in the kind of reflected version of him, and we'll see this a little bit, and I'll detail it as we go through the chapter, we could see this reflection of Ichigo as perhaps a version of Ichigo that willed Zangetsu as if it were like a perfect partner, right? That's a little bit more maybe worthy of wielding Zangetsu. And so this reflection of Ichigo, this white Ichigo, right? White wields Zangetsu with familiarity, with capability, as if White and Zangetsu are a lot more familiar with one another, and Ichigo stands as the one that is kind of opposed to them because he is not their ally or familiar. He doesn't fight alongside them, so he's pretty much fighting against them, metaphorically, but also literally right now. And so this idea of black and white comes up, and I mean, that's the big thing that's been going on throughout the manga, right? That we have these black and white forces in clash with each other. If it's not, the Shinigami versus the Hollow, or if it's not like these different kind of ethics that would like to be rendered in black and white. I mean, we talked about Bleach itself being the idea of cleansing the black to the white, right? The idea of cleansing the impurities in something, or washing it pure. And of course, as a manga, it's drawn in black and white, all of that. But I think here, black and white specifically is meant to reference Old Man Zangetsu and White, this reflection of Ichigo. And so we have these two kind of aspects of Ichigo's soul, because they are both born of his inner world. They were both born of his Shinigami self-awakening after the events of the Shattered Shaft. And certainly, like, this is sort of a kind of facet of the, like, power structure in Bleach, which is interesting. A lot of people, again, they don't talk about like the ways in which the power system works, because Kubo never really makes it super explicit in one sitting. But it is cool. Essentially, Shinigami have the ability to kind of externalize their Ryatsu, and essentially it becomes an entity separate of them. So they are essentially like, through the Asauchi that they train with, through their Zanpakuto, they have this externalization, this sort of manifestation of their Ryatsu that it comes to have its own personality, like Zangetsu, like uh, everyone that we've seen so far. So like Renji has Zabimaru, right? Those are all reflections of the actual person. They're all some facet of their soul, so to speak. But it's interesting that it has its own consciousness, at least in the case of Zangetsu. So that's pretty cool, right? So these are essentially parts of Ichigo's soul that he is doing battle with. Whenever I was saying, we were talking about this before, the idea of the self, and you're in conflict with yourself, and that makes you a conflicted person, and that makes you unable to really be in efficient conflict with the other people, right? If you're still battling yourself, how can you overcome someone else? And we saw that in the fight with Renji, and now that we're in this fight with Zaraki, right? Ichigo is still in conflict with himself, and so he has to resolve that conflict. And so here we are, resolving that conflict, a conflict that had started essentially and never been resolved since Ichigo's resurrection, right? And again, this is the undead, this is like the core thing, is Ichigo's dealing with the kind of conflict that's been going on since he became undead himself. So yeah, he's got to prove that he's worthy of possessing Zangetsu, and he has to free Zangetsu from White's hands, right? From his own hands, from a version of himself that willed Zangetsu masterfully, perhaps. And of course, I like that Zangetsu is, taken a hold of by White here, and that White will refer to Ichigo constantly as partner, right? So that this is something that came up before and is coming up here, that White calls Ichigo partner, because again, it's a part of his soul. It's this reflection of himself, and so Ichigo really shouldn't be at odds with this internal kind of manifestation of himself. But the fact that he is, the fact that Ichigo is at odds with a version of himself that can actually truly wield Zangetsu, because Ichigo isn't actually fighting alongside Zangetsu, right? So it's interesting here that we have this much more violent, perhaps, like kind of dark version of Ichigo, this reflection of Ichigo that still, kind of perhaps sinisterly enough refers to him as partner. And of course they clash. And I really do love that, like, Ichigo realizes what it's like to be on the other side of like a competent Zangetsu here. Again, speaking towards the typical kind of layout of the page, we read right to left. We have White, pushing in that direction, right? The momentum is controlled right now by White as he knocks Ichigo back into the next pages that we're flowing onto. And I like that we get this giant, like, almost, face, like, you can kind of see the eyes on either side, but it's this huge flash of Ryatsu coming off of White here. Yeah, and Ichigo's just like, holy shit, oh, damn, Yeah, never realized Zangetsu was such an awesome sword, which, there are more subtle ways to maybe build up how cool the main character's powers are, besides having the main character go, man, it's so cool. But yeah, I love that he realizes, like, the drastic difference between Zangetsu and, like, just a normal Zanpakuto, that it's like, how is he supposed to win? And of course, I love this, grabbing the kind of the what is it, the cloth, and then spinning Zangetsu around. Again, like, the physicality of the weapon is something that Kubo has paid a lot of mind to here. And you might think of, like, the cloth as having been just kind of an interesting detail, but the fact that it actually has this functionality, that it's perhaps even intended to be wielded this way is really telling and interesting. Um, Now, it's not to say that Ichigo hasn't kind of relied on Zangetsu in the past and used the cloth in interesting ways. I mean, he's tied it to his arm, right, so that he could continue to hold his sword. Um, we had that in that previous battle. So it isn't as if Ichigo isn't still wielding this weapon in a kind of full capacity. It's just that we're seeing other ways in which Zangetsu can be utilized, right? And yeah, I think it's such a cool visual, you know. Especially it throws Zangetsu right at Ichigo, and I love the panel change, just a page turn on the throw. Um, and yeah, the disappointment on White's face. He's like, I missed. It's good stuff. Like Ichigo kind of freaking out, like I never would have thought of even wielding it in that way. And so, yeah, it's something that I think is neat, is that we get to see this other way of wielding his weapon, and that White really is capable of, using Zangetsu in a way that Ichigo never was. Because again, this is meant to be a reflection of Ichigo that like actually fights alongside Zangetsu, right? It's meant to show Ichigo the actual true power that his sword has, that Ichigo hasn't been wielding, because Ichigo hasn't really been considering Zangetsu. And one of the considerations would be like, okay, well, I've got this wrap. What other ways could I wield this sword? To what extent and for what gains could I have? Um, and he brings up this kind of interesting point, and I love that like the panels are shot here. I like that White kind of gains more space on the page as he pushes Ichigo back with this approach of like, well, can you even become friends with someone for just asking them their name? And he ultimately overtakes the kind of panel. He gets this entire panel coming forward, and Ichigo is still shunted left on his own panel whenever we finally have this final panel that's just him. But it gets brought up, like, well, all you know is Zangetsu's name. How can you even begin to understand him? And it's neat here that Ichigo gets called out by like, well, you only know your sword's name. You only know Zangetsu's name. How can you possibly rely on his powers? And yet Ichigo hasn't like made any sort of effort yet to engage with White whatsoever. Like White is a complete anomaly right now. And we can only like make assumptions about like what White is meant to represent, or if White is just like some mirror version of Ichigo, or what, or if like again, what was really popular at the time was the theory that White is like a hollow kind of entity, right? Because it's the inverted colors and mostly because of the eyes. A lot of people assume that it's a hollow sort of entity. And yeah, I don't think that's without merit. Certainly, we know that Ichigo underwent hollowification, and that got brought up in the previous chapter. So, maybe this is some sort of hollow aspect of Ichigo. But the fact that Ichigo hasn't even started to broach this kind of conversation, hasn't even started to even have a conversation with White about like what White's name is, right? Who White is, trying to find out anything about him, I think it speaks volumes, because Ichigo hasn't done that for Zangetsu either, right? and I love that, like, what an impassioned plea if you opened up your heart just a little bit, right? Coming from this like absolute sadist of a character. But you couldn't do it. You don't care about your Senpakuto. You only have to train yourself. And I love that Ichigo does realize here that that's the case. We get this wonderful shot of old man Zangetsu there, again standing up on his usual perch, watching this all go down. And yeah, I think one of the reasons why White is a fan favorite character is just, again, like the absolute mastery that he has with Zangetsu, the way that he wields Zangetsu in such a unique and kind of interesting way, like throwing it and then retrieving it. Which doesn't seem all that effective, to be honest, but it's cool, is the thing. It's like, I think it's one of the things that might not have occur to you as a reader, that it could be wielded in that way, and so it comes off as surprising and exciting and kind of visceral that we get this kind of dark version of Ichigo, who really seems to revel in this combat. It's basically Ichigo but cooler. What if Ichigo was cool? Is what this chapter dares to ask. And so it's neat that he has this, reflection on Zaraki, right? Where he's like, oh, well, you won't get any stronger. And it's like Ichigo realizes, like, well, fucking, I wouldn't either, because I'm not really using my sword to become any stronger than how I am. Yeah. I do love here that he finally decides, okay, I'm done throwing and I'm going to go and clash and carve Ichigo up. And of course here, Ichigo does make like this actual like serious attempt, like, okay, I actually do want to wield you, Zangetsu. I do want to get to learn your name, your strength, your power, who you are, and fight alongside you. And again, it's a reflection of what we're talking about in this series, this bond, right? Because Ichigo certainly he's realized that he doesn't actually have a bond to his weapon, to this aspect of himself, if you want to call it that, but that he doesn't have this bond with Zangetsu, and so he needs to kind of actually invest in that bond. He can't just take advantage of it, right? And so, like, that's a lot of what this chapter is focused on. Is Ichigo has this bond that he's been taking for granted, that he hasn't been leveraging to its full potential, that he hasn't been really investing in, and he needs to do that. And the strength that he gains here is the strength whenever he realizes, like, okay, well, he can actually do that, that they need to actually fight side by side, that, all of that, right? That's why he's given Zangetsu once again. That's why, it transfers back to him, because he starts to actually wield his own power, meaningfully, right? He's not fighting against it anymore, but he's fighting alongside it, metaphorically and literally, right? So that's why it's in his hands rather than in White's, because he's no longer going against Zangetsu or just using Zangetsu, which is cool. So it falls into our kind of thematic idea of these sort of interpersonal connections and the power, or the value that they bring to someone's life. But furthermore, it also ties back into people's connection to death, right? Because Ichigo only gained this ability through his own death. And so it is this kind of interesting thing in that, through his death, Ichigo is able to make this new connection. And it's this connection that like keeps him alive still yet, which is interesting. I think it's neat. Now, as far as like the individual versus society, there is still like kind of an interesting intersection, I will say, with just Soul Reapers in general, and that they have to kind of build this very personal bond with this individualistic aspect of themselves, in order to wield this weapon for the sake of society, which is kind of captivating. So those things feel kind of at odds with one another. But it's interesting that Ichigo leverages this very Soul Reaper power, this weapon of this militaristic society for his individual goals, which is essentially kind of what the Zenpakuto should be doing in the first place. And so I think you'll find, especially within Bleach, that whenever a character really wields their Zenpakuto for their own individual desires, they seem perhaps stronger. So, as you saw with Renji using Zabimaru against Ichigo, Renji really wanted Ruki to be saved. And again, it's reflective of like their resolve being in the wrong place, right? Whenever they really want something, perhaps selfish, but at least something that their soul truly desires, that their weapon they can really stand by side with because it's an aspect of their soul. There's more power there, typically. At the very least, that is certainly the case with Ichigo, and we see him regain Zangetsu. I really do like this clash here. I love the expression on White's face, like, ah, shit. Like, well, that's the end of this fight, right? But I do love that instant kind of transformation that we have. White closing in with Zangetsu, and he comes for this slash, and then we get that block with Zangetsu here. And I love that Ichigo looks across the way to old man Zangetsu, and they kind of meet eyes, and he's like, "You're giving me another chance," and he stills himself, and he's, all right, thank you. And I love that it immediately, we don't spend any more time than we just flash back, and I love, we're still in that one moment. Like, this all happened within, like, a breath, right? That Ichigo just immediately erupts with his spiritual pressure. I love the expression that Zaraki has here, just like, wait, what? Um, just the look over the shoulder, right? What is this spiritual pressure? And here we have Ichigo coming to stand, looking like he's ready to fight on. Of course, we have more of the fourth diary here as he complains about the 11th company, how they came to come check up on Ikaku and Yumachika and then started drinking and stripping, and it was out of control. I wish them all good health. Yeah, it is kind of cute. More kind of world building. We see how the different divisions of the Gote 13, of the 13 court guard companies, how they have this kind of animosity between each other, and it's neat to kind of see a little bit of that shown here in this omake, this little chapter bonus segment between chapters that we get. But yeah, that's it for this one. That is all that I have to say on the topic of chapter 111. I mean, as far as personal response, clearly I do like this chapter. I really do like White a lot. I think White's a neat character. Here we finally get we get our first introduction to White, and I think White shows off a lot of really neat facets of his character, like the way that he uses Zangetsu, the kind of crazed expressions he has, that kind of like twisted way that he refers to and talks to Ichigo. It's all really cool stuff. And it really helps to serve the character and give the character a very strong kind of identity initially. But also, interestingly enough, Old Man Zangetsu kind of takes a back seat here, that he sort of stands back and lets this all play out, and doesn't say one thing or another, and really Ichigo is constantly sort of pleading to him, interestingly enough. Yeah, it's neat. It's neat. And of course, I love that we finally get back into the conflict with Zaraki, and now Ichigo's powered up, and they're finally ready to kind of conflict. They're ready to fight some more. So we're getting back to that conflict. As those characters are going to inevitably clash, and now Ichigo has a little bit more strength to perhaps make this fight one that's a little bit more even killed for the captain, Zaraki Kenpachi. Yeah, so it's cool stuff. I do like it. I think it's a solid chapter. But please let me know your thoughts. Let me know in the comments, if you have any thoughts on any of these characters, especially if this is your first time, how you feel about White, how you feel about like this kind of revelations of how to use Zangetsu. For everyone else, though, for those of you that are perhaps rereading this or interested in the spoilers and everything, let's get to that. Let's get to the spoilers for this chapter, and there are quite a few. First thing I do want to address, somebody brought this up in a comment for a previous video, but the Rite Tai guy, the messenger division guy, I misread it because he says that he's like 5th squad, but it's actually like the 5th squad of the Omnitsukudo, like assassin group, essentially the group that is headed by the 2nd division. So technically, I think that guy would be a 2nd division, and the Rite Tai would belong to the 2nd division, even though they're technically Omnitsukudo. Yeah. Worth noting, I misread it because I was scratching my head. I was like, is this really like? Because like again, the translation for Viz gets me kind of flipped on my head, especially whenever they refer to the different divisions of the Gote, which again, at this point in the manga, they refer to as the 13 court guard companies, and so they refer to them as different companies, but we'll see them referred to as squads or divisions, and so whenever the guy was like fifth squad, I thought, oh, like the fifth division, the fifth, company, but actually he would have been part of the second division technically. I guess with Amatsudo, I don't know if you technically count as a second division person or if they're an entirely different group that just happens to be run by the head of the second division, right? That being at this point Soifon. So, anyway, worth noting, worth clearing up. And I do leave that for the spoiler section because technically we haven't been introduced to the Amatsudo yet, or the second division, whatever. But yeah, worth kind of clearing up. I will mention it in the actual video whenever we finally do get introduced to the second division, the Amatsudo, whatever they're called, the assassin guys. They have like 5 different sections. One of them is the messengers. Anyway, let's talk about this chapter, though. Let's talk about spoilers in this chapter. And of course, man, it is hard for me to differentiate Zangetsu and White sometimes. Obviously, yes, they're standing side by side because they're both, again, aspects of Ichigo's power. They are both essentially an aspect of Zangetsu itself, though Old Man is, again, that facet of Quincy powers within Ichigo. And I love that he represents, like, Yuhabak. It's good stuff. But yeah, this whole idea of, like, if you're worthy of possessing me, take me from your own hands. And then this positioning of White as, like, Ichigo rather than as Zangetsu. It's like, well, it's Zangetsu as well. And I do like that he, continues to refer to Ichigo as partner because they are partners. This whole sort of talk that he has with Ichigo later is on that. Again, I love that the Hollow Mask is sort of reflected here as this embodiment of his Reiatsu. I think that's cool. Spiritual pressure burning up the air is really neat, especially whenever we think about, like, the way in which Getsuga works, or even the way in which Ingetsu works, being, like, spiritual pressure literally burning the air. So it's cool that a like Zangetsu can kind of affect the atmosphere in such a way. Of course, the sad thing is that Ichigo never does do this cool trick, as far as I remember. Never do we get a cool, like, Ichigo. Now I know whenever he's like full hollow mode later on, he does throw his sword, or at the very least, he retrieves his sword with some Jedi, like, just reach out and it flies back into your hand nonsense. But yeah, I do think it is cool that, notably, White wields Zangetsu using the strap because that is the part that is representative of him, right? So it's cool that, like, he would be more familiar wielding Zangetsu this way because it leverages that aspect of him, which I do like. And this whole, like, thing, like, I kind of try to point it out in the non-spoiler section. The whole, like, oh, you think you just become friends with someone just because you ask their name, and it challenges Ichigo's kind of mode of making bonds with people anyway, but especially here because this is Zangetsu, right? And, like, Ichigo hasn't taken the time to actually learn that White is Zangetsu. And so whenever White complains about all of that, he's complaining about Ichigo's relationship to him, which is kind of cool. And of course, yeah, he wants to become even stronger. Of course, yeah. This whenever you read it that way, seeing old man Zangetsu kind of like you better fucking stay in line, White. You better not spill the beans. But yeah, the idea of like Ichigo kind of being on the same page as Kenpachi is interesting because Kenpachi, he's able to kind of speak to his sword spirit. He talks to Ichiru. Ichiru very much is this individual entity that is external from him, that exists and interacts with him. It's just that he hasn't taken his time to actually wield and learn about his sword and actually have that side by side connection. He relies entirely on his own power, right? Which I think is kind of cool. So it's apt. They're more similar than Ichigo probably even realizes. So yeah. Um yeah, interestingly enough, again there's that sort of maybe some sort of duplicity there because like I said, at the end of the day, they both represent Ichigo's powers, and both of them have some sort of facet of what it means to be Zangetsu. I think it's unfair to call one Zangetsu and the other one not. Um, but like, yeah, it's curious. I think he's certainly here, like trying to wield. He doesn't realize that it's truly his Quincy aspect that he's calling upon, that he's really wielding here, but it is, and we'll see that a little bit more in the next chapter. There's some things that I think are interesting to point out then, but I mean he's still wielding Zangetsu as it were. And interestingly enough, we did see Zangetsu get shattered physically just earlier, and here it is back in one piece. And I think the rationale for that is that it is, once more, it is this manifestation that he has made of his Reiatsu. It is not an Asauchi that has been given his power externalized, like all the other Shinigami. It is, in fact, a like pretty much this externalized manifestation that he has made. Um, because he essentially does have like like hollow powers as well as Quincy powers as well as Shinigami powers, and he's able to kind of use those to proxy a sword. But it is more like Quincy power than anything right now. So it'd be like if you like sliced Ishida's bow in half, like the big spirit bow he has, he could obviously just reform that with his reishi. I think that's the same case here, right? But I don't know. Let me know your thoughts on that too, like what your take is on it. Because certainly Ichigo's sword reforming is, I think, reflective of the fact that it's not a traditional Shinigami power whatsoever. That there's clearly more going on there. But yeah, I don't know. That's how I read it. Might vary for you. Anyway, do let me know. But that's about all that I had to say for this chapter for spoilers and other connections. Certainly, yes, Ichigo coming back from essentially the dead. Ichigo having these sort of like put to the point, the brink of death, over and over. Especially Ichigo being stabbed in the chest and then coming back is constant for him. Ichigo's going to see a lot of chest wound into revival related to are spurned on by his hollow aspect. We're going to get that sort of again. I don't know if he gets hit in the chest, but I do know that obviously all the hollow stuff happens in the fight with Byakuya, but we're gonna get that again, of course, whenever we battle down the line with what's his face, Ulquiorra. But definitely, like, might even happen kind of with Grimmjow too. Though I think Grimmjow just kind of lays Ichigo out that first time, and then the second time Ichigo's a little bit more in control of his power. So I don't remember for sure how that goes down, but I know for sure. I mean, Ulquiorra, absolutely, that is the case. So it's interesting that like these opponents that Ichigo comes across that he's not quite powerful enough to deal with, consistently kind of wound him in the same ways, and then he relies on the same sort of strength. Those structures, I think, are meant to parallel each other, and to show us the different ways things can go. Because obviously, the way the Ulquiorra stuff plays out is significantly different than the way that the events play out here with Zaraki, and I think that's the point, right? It's meant to show us, a more dire situation, but also how Ichigo could lose that sort of balance and that control. Like, what if this same situation happens, but White wins? It's essentially the kind of thing that's exploring, more or less. Oh, and Ichigo's dead, but we'll get there when we get there. So it's cool that like this is more or less set up as a scenario that we will be returning to, right? Ichigo essentially being put to the brink of death and then coming back. Ichigo being the undead, and how that manifests in different ways for him. So yeah, look forward to a little bit more of that. Again, love this volume. I think it's a great volume. I think it is sets up a lot of the really interesting structures that we'll be returning to with Ichigo as our protagonist, but in Bleach in general. And it's just cool. Lots of fun fights. So yeah, let me know if you like this chapter, because it's one that I kind of really enjoy. Give me your thoughts and all that. But as always, thank you so much for getting through the video. Please give the video a like. Please share it. Please subscribe if you haven't already. And if you would like to support the channel in another way, you can always support on Patreon. Right now on screen, you are seeing all the other patrons. I want to give a huge shout out and thanks to those of you who do support me. Thank you very much. As always, this has been Karakura Gold, reminding you that spirits are forever with you. Stay gold.